Welcome to Salon Talks. My name is Ashlie Stevens, and I'm here today with Abi Balingit. She is a baker and the author of Mayumu, Filipino American Desserts Remixed. Abi, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
When you essentially launched this sort of second baking career, it was from your home kitchen. You had another job, you weren't working in a professional bakery. What was your kitchen like at that point when you first kind of started jumping into baking in this way?
Yeah, I mean, like to put it into context, I feel like everyone in like 2020 was baking banana bread, sourdough. I mean, it was like all over the place. But like personally, I think I at the time I was living with three other roommates, and so it was kind of bustling because we were all working from home. So I do work a 9 to 5 job, but remotely, and so there were times when like to put on the stand mixer, I'd be like keep an ear out because you can hear everyone's Zoom meetings, honestly, like or the walls are thin. And I felt really bad because like KitchenAids, like I love them, but they sound like a Mustang or something. They're so loud that it doesn't matter, where you turn it on or try to muffle it, it's just super loud. So I think it was just always kind of bustling in the kitchen, or at least I try my best to be cognizant of everyone's space and time. But it was like truly like the only escape that I felt, especially just being really nostalgic for like being home. But yeah, I kind of missed it a lot, and it was nice to kind of bake for fun.
So I was curious, when it came time to write your first cookbook, did having that experience of having to try to formulate desserts in an apartment kitchen, did that play into how you wrote recipes for maybe other people who have, like smaller kitchens?
Oh yeah, definitely. I felt like everything I did was basically all tested from like my apartment. I never, went to another location to do anything. So I was really mindful of, some recipes, a lot of Filipino recipes growing up that, I tried. They were always so large to like feed like families of like very large sizes, which is typical of my family as well. But like living in an apartment and also feeding yourself and cooking and baking for one, I was really just like, well, there's certain recipes. I technically have like one recipe that's like a mug of pudding for one, and it's kind of nice because I think that a big part of like baking and being kind of cognizant of just like waste. Like I really love trying new recipes, but I feel like I have to justify it with like, we're gonna give this away to neighbors, we're giving this away to roommates, we're giving away to roommates' boyfriends, we're giving away to everybody. But like during the process of the cookbook, it was hard because I was basically like going through 10 recipes sometimes in a week. And so I think that like, in all aspects, I try my best to have things that were easy to divide and also kind of just scale back if you wanted to in the recipe. So I hope everyone likes them who works in a tiny kitchen too.
Well, your cookbook is gorgeous. I think it's going to get people excited to be in the kitchen. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about your influences. You read in the introduction that you let your palate roam free in terms of inspiration. Could you talk a little bit about what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with something being called Filipino American, I'm always kind of like in awe of just like what American actually does mean to everyone because, everyone's experiences are so different depending on where you grew up. And luckily for me, I grew up in like the Bay Area and also Central Valley in California. So I've always been like kind of exposed to like everyone of like different ethnicities, cultures, and so many influences from just, being friends with people or just like going out to restaurants, especially living in New York. I think it all sums to the fact that like there's just so much access to so many different types of ingredients, different types of just cuisines that like I think this book is kind of emblematic of. It is Filipino at its core, but being Filipino American, I think a lot of those kind of recipes are all a little bit of fusion from somewhere else. And I really like that about it. I think it's really true to me because it's hard to be like, I never lived in the Philippines full time. So it is a definitely different experience, especially what you have readily available in terms of ingredients. So I think that adaptability is really present in the book.
Definitely. Well, one recipe that I specifically wanted to highlight because I feel like it really beautifully encapsulates this idea of Filipino American Desserts Remixed, like in the title of the book, but it's your play on a confetti cake. Could you talk a little bit about that recipe and how you developed it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a big fan of Pillsbury's, like funfetti, anything. Like I will definitely order that at any like at any kind of like bakery if I can. But a pianono, it's like a Filipino sponge cake, obviously roots in Spanish roots with all like, colonial origins of, the history in the Philippines. But it's named after a pope, I think. And so the actual sponge cake traditionally can be pretty simple. It's just like a simple vanilla sponge, or can be an ube sponge, with just like a light margarine kind of a filling. But for this, I was very much like, I definitely have like a bit more of a sweet tooth. I would say like the biggest compliment in like Asian desserts usually is like it's not too sweet. So I really try to get that like middle balance. So instead of just like margarine and sugar, I go ahead and use like kind of like a whipped cream filling, so it's not as like overwhelming. But the top and the covering of it all is like an American traditional buttercream. But I love it because it's so colorful. It's just like within the batter, it's like sprinkles on the outside, sprinkles. And I really am a believer of just like putting sprinkles on everything to cover up anything. So if you even like, for me, like I'm not perfect. I remember, a few iterations of it, I was like, oh, there are cracks. And, you're trying your best to like, sponge cakes can be a little unforgivable if it's very naked. But luckily you just cover it in frosting, you cover it in sprinkles. And so I think it's really good for just anyone at any level to try it, even though it is kind of intimidating doing a Swiss roll of any kind of capacity.
Well, so speaking of presentation, I enjoy following you for your baking, but I equally probably enjoy following you for your sense of fashion, your style. And I was curious if, obviously you do have a love of fashion. Does that play into maybe inspiration for how you present your desserts or things along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like traditionally I'm very much like really into color, and like whatever I dress up as, I like technically my hair is in process right now. I'm like molting into a different color at this point. But I inherently, I guess, like and subconsciously, I feel like I've just incorporated that in like a lot of the desserts in the book. There's like specifically one that's like a rainbow fruit pulveron. And it's just like pulveron is kind of just a crumbly shortbread cookie made with like toasted flour. And so I like bump up colors sometimes with like gel food coloring. But it like with freeze dried fruit, some of it is super vivid. Just like the red, like raspberry is just like super, super red. So there's certain things that are naturally occurring that are really colorful, especially like people think about ube. That's definitely the first thing that comes to mind. But it is kind of nice to kind of, I feel inspiration from like a lot of things and people. And I think New York is kind of like the funnest place to live because I would just see people on the street wearing whatever and no one cares. And I kind of love that because I think that is kind of an aspect that I kind of want to, put into my desserts, and the ethos of my baking too is like, like it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but if it is, like, that'd be nice. But like at the same time, you do you. And whatever that means like to everyone, I really hope people take pride in whatever they're making in their kitchen.
Well, you just kind of touched on this. I was curious if you ever felt pressure while writing this book, like, oh, I need to rein it in. I need to be more traditional. Was that something that you ever felt in terms of a pressure? Yeah.
I mean, I'm really lucky because I feel like my editor, she's also Asian American, and that really made a difference, honestly, in being able to write what I wanted to write without judgment or without any need to like whitewash certain recipes. It's just like I think it's really hard though sometimes when you're making fusion things, you definitely want to give credit to whatever culture you're taking from. So if it was a Latinx kind of inspired dish with like Filipino, I'll definitely say that. But in terms of like explanation, sometimes it can be a little hard to be like, where did this come from? And I think the really good thing about my editor was also kind of just like, give people more context because they're just going to be like, where did this come from? Like, what's happening in your head? And I think, sometimes you think that's just like automatic that people just, oh yeah, this makes sense. But certain things do take more explanation. I think finding the fine balance of, being able to explain it well, but also not over explain because you shouldn't have to, was really something that was really a challenge, but also really great about the book, I think.
Definitely. Something that I thought was great about this specifically as a dessert book is that you actually talk about umami throughout the book. I feel like that's an element of sweet baking, at least in the States sometimes, that often gets overlooked,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love sweet, salty, savory. And I think the thing about my cookbook, I feel like not just like from Filipino desserts, I love like getting inspiration from like Filipino savory dishes. And so there's definitely like a lot of like cookie recipes that kind of like jump off of that point. But it's just exciting to kind of use like the whole gamut of like Filipino ingredients, and also, like ingredients that aren't necessarily Filipino, but like can be added to like a Filipino dish. So I love it. It's so much fun.
Makes sense. So to that point, I was curious, and you talk about this a little bit in the beginning of the book, but what are some, I guess, pantry essentials, or things that you make sure that you keep in the kitchen or that you have on hand, that you would encourage other people if they're looking to sort of cook through your cookbook? What should they maybe go out and buy, and where would you recommend that they look for it?
Yeah, so I feel like there's certain non-negotiable like ingredients that are kind of like you have to definitely go to kind of a specialty Asian grocery store to get. And for me, it's like ube extract, those kinds of things are super important. In terms of flavor, it's kind of hard to mimic any other way. But also like a big part of like Filipino kind of cuisine is a factor of just like there's so many preserved kind of things and like things in jars and condiments. There are certain like especially like dessert recipes that are the chilled kind of desserts that are obviously like halo halo, fruit salad, buko pandan. There are certain things that are like nata de coco and like this sugar palm fruit, like these chewy, like yummy little jelly things, and like red bean are all kind of like preserved in syrup. So you definitely should get jars of that because it's just like really kind of what makes it different from any other kind of, like Filipino, I mean, different from other kinds of desserts. But along the lines of everything else, I feel like, coconut flakes can be some things that I definitely use in the book. But if you have like flour, sugar, butter, eggs, those are also kind of important because there's definitely a lot of, just traditional types of bases of cookies and cakes and all the, American fare of desserts.
Definitely. So I was curious as well. Well, I'll start by saying that your cookbook is very approachable. We were even talking about it, myself and a coworker, where she's admittedly not much of a baker, and your cookbook got her excited to get into the kitchen. So, I think that says something really important about the accessibility of this book. But I was curious, let's say that somebody is a novice baker, maybe they're intimidated by the idea of getting in the kitchen in sort of a context outside of making dinner. What recipes would you point them to in your cookbook as like, this is a place you can start?
Oh yeah, I feel like there's one like that sticks out to me because I just made it for a friend for a potluck, and it was a thing where I was tight on time, tight on like literally everything. I was just like not the will to make like anything super fancy. So I kind of mentioned it earlier, but there's I have a fiesta fruit salad recipe that's like very common for any Filipino party. It's just like basically putting condensed milk, and usually just like some cream based type of like milky liquid, and like also just like all these canned cocktailed fruit, kind of just like the jellies we were talking about, like nata de coco, and you just put it all together in a bowl and you mix it and you let it sit for like 4 minutes, or not 4 minutes, I'm sorry, 4 minutes was too fast. I got ahead of myself. But I mean, I think it only, a couple hours would be nice as long as it's cold. But I love those kinds of desserts that are not intimidating at all. You literally just put everything in a bowl together and you serve it and everyone is happy and it's refreshing. I think mine's is a little different from traditional fruit salads just because I think I handpick a bit more of the fruits that I add in it. I have this weird thing where I don't love maraschino cherries and I don't love like the texture of like the canned pears in a fruit cocktail.
Understand. Yeah, I get it.
It's kind of mushy, and I was like, oh, so for this, there's like lychee, there's grapefruit slices, there's I think there's a bit of peaches and everything. So it is a bit more of like tailored to my taste, and I hope everyone else likes it kind of a thing. But definitely recommend that recipe if you're really just like short on time and want to impress the crowd.
Definitely. So you mentioned your cookbook comes out later this month. Is that right?
Correct, on the 28th of February.
So I'm curious. So you've got essentially sort of a 1 month run up to the official release. Do you find yourself still baking these days, or are you kind of baked out at this point? What's that look like for you?
It's so funny because I feel like I mean, it's kind of like such a fast turnaround from when like I was done baking and edits and now like in the the promotion stage of everything, that I have kind of taken a step back of just like, I used to do cakes for friends sometimes if they've asked, or anybody who would like kind of, want a birthday kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm really, really tired. I did like 75 recipes for the book. And so like, there are certain things that like, I revisited just, if I'm going somewhere and I want to like bring something to a friend or anyone who's celebrating something. But, like at this point, I'm like, all right, I'm going to take it easy, but it's probably the end of the month. I will be ideally baking for some, hopefully a pop-up of some sort. Everything is kind of in the works right now, but it is exciting to kind of like, even for me, like having this book is kind of nice because before I just kind of like wouldn't have like a point of reference for myself. I would kind of like have to do so much research to find something that I wanted to make, that I'm like, wow, I made a book so I can consult myself. Like past me to future me is, it's great. I'm so happy for that me that had the energy to make this.
I totally understand. I totally understand. Well, Abi Balingit, thank you again so much for joining us today on Salon Talks. Really appreciate it.
It was an honor. Thank you so much for your time. It was so great talking to you.